Welcome back to Question Period. While anti-abortion protesters gathered on Parliament Hill this week inside the House of Commons, Liberal MPs accused the Conservatives of preparing to attack reproductive rights. Using Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's recent comments about applying the notwithstanding clause to criminal laws, the Liberals say Poilievre will use that tool to scale back women's rights.
Are we fear-mongering? Yeah. Unequivocally, no. It wasn't too long ago in this country that abortion was a crime. So it is not too much to say that this is the slope we could be going down.
If they're against also getting contraceptives, then how exactly are women supposed to have control over their own bodies in this country? And their lack of willingness to talk about sex education or to talk about sex at all is, to me, deeply disturbing.
The notwithstanding clause allows governments to override portions of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and protect their legislation from court challenges for a period of 5 years. In response, Poilievre's office had this to say, writing, quote, "In part, this outlandish claim shows the true desperation of Justin Trudeau and his flailing Liberals. A common-sense Conservative government will not legislate on abortion and therefore would never use this section of the Constitution pertaining to this matter." The Sunday Strategy Session is here to talk about all of that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And David Hurley was a top advisor to Prime Minister Paul Martin and is currently the principal partner at the Gandalf Group. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. David, I'll start with you. It's not new for the Liberals to accuse the Conservatives. They've done so with some success, of course, in the past two elections. Why do you think they're doing it potentially a year and a half out from the next election now?
Well, I think probably in part because Mr. Poilievre, I think, made a mistake with this notwithstanding clause business. I don't think he needed it for the criminal law argument he wants to make. And I think he has opened this issue up. And of course, it's a very, very live issue in the United States and likely to become more live as their election gets closer. So the reality is this is a terrific issue for the Liberal Party. And this moves votes away from Conservatives and toward Liberals, because this is an issue. Right now, Pierre Poilievre's in the middle of the mainstream on affordability. He's in the middle of the mainstream on housing, but he's not in the mainstream, and the Conservatives are not in the mainstream on a woman's right to choose. And so this is an issue the Liberal Party's used not just in the last 10 years, but for 30 years. And the reason it works is because the Conservatives are vulnerable to it. And as long as they don't seal off that vulnerability, this will continue to be an impediment for female votes.
Do you think that's true, Corey? And to the point of sort of sealing it off, the statement that Poilievre offered there was pretty unequivocal, but for some reason it doesn't seem to have convinced everyone that it is.
Well, because the Liberal approach on this is to make the accusation without any evidence to support it and say because you want to use the notwithstanding clause if required on criminal justice issues like catch and release of repeat offenders, that means you're going to somehow, regulate abortion, despite every statement and the Conservative Party's, policy that passed in their last convention that they're going to do no such thing. Look, it is a time-honored technique and attack. I'll agree with David on that. But there's a time-honored attack from Conservatives on Liberals that I think has a lot more merit, and that's around criminal justice issues. And the courts have been, at times, an impediment to dealing with the issue. And so him saying that, I think, actually, favors the Conservatives.
Here's the quick caveat, and I totally take Corey's point there, Kathleen. The issue was the Globe, Marika Walsh at the Globe then followed up when he made those initial comments and said, hey, are you just going to use this on the not on the matters of criminality? And they didn't rule out everything else until her article came out. And then the Conservatives said, actually, no, it's just that. And then they were, very specific in response to the claims that Liberals are making. But they didn't say it right away. And my guess is that opened them up to a little bit of this, too.
It was a real error, as David said, on behalf of Pierre Poilievre to make those comments. And it was a gift, frankly, to both the Liberals and New Democrats. And what you're seeing, is basically Pierre Poilievre wants to, it's not only, what he's saying is not only dangerous to Canadians and their charter rights, it's actually dangerous to democracy, because essentially he wants to eliminate any kind of judicial function whatsoever. And I think that it's fair pressure for New Democrats and for Liberals to extend the possibility that, frankly, Mr. Poilievre may extend this to both workers' rights, to women's rights to choose their reproductive choice, because we've seen premiers across the country do this in the past. We've seen Doug Ford run roughshod, frankly, over the freedom to speak on political issues in terms of advertising. That's also going to the Supreme Court in just around 10 or 11 days. We've seen Doug Ford also run roughshod over Labor's right to collectively bargain. We've seen Scott Moe, frankly, threaten to run roughshod with the notwithstanding clause to use it as well against trans kids' rights to use the pronouns that they want to choose. So it's not that dissimilar to imagine that Pierre Poilievre will use this, and frankly, it was a political mistake and a blunder.
Not many of them, though, yet at this point, of all the provincial examples you provided, though, there, that Kathleen provided, David, have suffered electorally because of what they did. I have noted very much so the blowback to it, and in Doug Ford's case, he essentially had to walk it back, but they do have yet to suffer for it electorally. In this case, it would be the first time the federal government does it. I think to Corey's point, I think the Conservatives do have a lead on the Liberals when it comes to issues around criminality. They were striking a chord on drug policy, on a bunch of other stuff. I don't know why he needed to say this that opened him up to all this other stuff.
Well, I don't think there's any political blowback to using the notwithstanding clause, which is deeply unfortunate because I think it shouldn't even be in the charter. But nonetheless, that's a different point, to be honest. This is about abortion and a woman's right to choose. And the reason why the Conservatives are vulnerable on this, and the reason why it works as an issue, is because they're the only party that has a significant number of people in it who don't believe in a woman's right to choose. Quite usually, their leader is included in that. Now, in this particular case, Mr. Poilievre is saying, I won't do that, but he's not saying in any convincing way that he believes in a woman's right to choose. Canadians have just seen a bunch of prospective Supreme Court justices in the United States say, I don't believe in a woman's right to choose, but I won't change it. And then as soon as they got there, changed it. So I don't think that women trust Conservatives on this. And frankly, I don't think they should.
My guess is, Corey, I'll get your response to that, but also my guess is that the way in which this is unfolding and has been unfolding in the United States will provide a welcome background for the Liberals as they attempt to make this case.
Look, it is a classic ad hominem attack. And I notice my two esteemed colleagues didn't bring up where the notwithstanding clause is used all the time, and that is the province of Quebec, without even a comment or a mention by either of them. The province of Quebec uses notwithstanding clause in essentially every piece of legislation that their legislature passes. And, although David doesn't like it, there would be no charter if there was not a notwithstanding clause. And so, to cherry pick which parts of the Constitution you want is, in my view, a violation of the Constitution. And the accusation that you're going to restrict a woman's right to choose by the Liberals and NDP without any basis in doing so is, let's just call it politics as usual in the Liberal Party.
I guess the big question is, I think to both Corey and David's points, it has been politics as usual for a long time. Often some of the Conservative leaders, I'm thinking of Andrew Scheer, for example, more specifically, gave some oxygen to that by being, sort of lack of a position, of a clear position. In this case, he is saying very specifically what he wouldn't do. He has said it in a debate that he's pro-choice. Does he need to say it more, or will that never convince?
There's a couple of things that are making it problematic for Pierre, no matter what he has declaratively said. Number one, the past week there was the March for Life. His MPs were out there speaking to those anti-choice protesters.
Just a few of them, though,
just
to
a
be
few,
fair.
for sure.
Yeah.
But still, they're calling themselves conservatives, and they were speaking on behalf of the conservative movement. Another thing, more importantly, is how you've seen New Democrats and Liberals try to wedge the Conservatives on the pharmacare bill, and specifically around denying women access to free contraception and birth control and reproductive choice. And actually what's interesting is now the Liberals are planning to, with New Democrats, fast track that bill to actually get it passed in a record time. And because they believe this issue, as David raised before, about women's right to choose, women's reproductive choice, is a key one for women's voters, and they don't trust Poilievre on the issue.
I'd only say that the Liberals have yet to detail exactly how that will roll out, and the money is spread over a number of years. So even if it does pass, they haven't said immediately you're going to get that.
But it's
right
a policy that women want. They want to have access to free birth control, and that is
Sure, and
that
it's a convenient political wedge
for
sure. They just
Yeah.
haven't actually told women when they're going to get it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks everyone. Thanks to our Sunday strategy session, David Hurley, Corey Tonight, and Kathleen Monk.